Make her clean the blood hall before the king sees what low-born hands have done. The order sliced through the silence, and Clara Whitmore felt every eye in the royal hall turn toward her. She stood beneath a row of crimson banners, a plain gray dress clinging to her thin shoulders, her pale hands wrapped around a wooden bucket that suddenly felt heavier than stone. The blood hall was not a place for girls like her. It was the oldest chamber in Blackthorn Palace, a long room of black marble, iron chandeliers, and throne steps carved from white stone that seemed to glow under the torchlight. Generations of Alpha Kings had ruled from that raised seat. Oaths were spoken here. Alliances were sealed here. Punishments were named here, though tonight there was no danger left in the room, only the cold stain of judgment lingering on the floor. A dark red spill stretched across the marble like a reminder that power always left a mark, and Lady Marin had chosen Clara to erase it. "Well?" Marin asked, her voice sweet enough to make the insult sharper. "Are you waiting for applause, little Omega?" Laughter moved through the gathered nobles, soft at first, then bolder when Clara lowered her eyes. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than defense. In the palace kitchens, she could disappear among steam, flour, and the clatter of dishes. In the laundry rooms, she could fold sheets until her fingers went numb and no one remembered her name. But here, beneath the watchful eyes of alpha lords and jeweled ladies, there was nowhere to hide. Every breath she took felt too loud. Every step forward felt like a mistake being counted. Clara knelt and dipped the cloth into the bucket. The water was cold enough to sting. She pressed the rag to the floor and began to clean, moving carefully, trying not to look toward the throne. No servant of her rank was supposed to come within 10 feet of those steps. Everyone knew the rule. Omegas did not approach the king's seat. They served from the edges, bowed from the shadows, and left before anyone important had to notice them. But the stain had spread close to the first stair, and Lady Marin knew it. That was why Clara had been sent here. Not because the hall needed cleaning. Because the court needed entertainment. "Closer," Marin said. Clara's fingers tightened around the rag. "My lady, the royal steps are forbidden." A hush fell, pleased and hungry. Marin smiled. "Then perhaps you should have cleaned faster before the stain reached them." Clara swallowed the ache rising in her throat. She glanced around, hoping one face might show mercy, but the nobles only watched as if she were a candle burning down for their amusement. So she moved forward by one careful inch, then another. Her knees brushed the cold marble. The air changed near the throne, heavier somehow, filled with cedar, iron, and winter smoke, the scent of King Rowan Blackthorn himself lingering even in his absence. Clara had never stood close to him. She had only seen him from far away, a tall figure in black at the end of ceremonies, a king whose silence could quiet a hall faster than any shout. They said he missed nothing. They said he could sense a lie before it was spoken. Clara prayed he would not return before she was gone. Her cloth reached the edge of the first step. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone laughed under their breath. Someone whispered, "She'll be punished for that." Clara froze, her pulse beating hard in her ears. She wanted to say she had been ordered. She wanted to say she was only trying to do what they demanded. But the words stayed trapped behind her teeth, where so many other truths had died. Then, from the far end of the hall, the great doors opened. Wind swept across the marble, carrying the clean bite of snow and pine. Every laugh vanished. Every noble bowed. Clara looked up just enough to see black boots stop at the entrance, then the hem of a royal cloak moving through the torchlight. King Rowan Blackthorn had returned. King Rowan Blackthorn moved through the hall without hurry, yet every step seemed to push the air lower against Clara's lungs. The nobles who had been laughing moments before bent their heads so quickly their jewels flashed like fallen stars. Lady Marin straightened first, smoothing her silver gown, her smile returning in the careful shape of innocence. Clara remained on. Her knees beside the first throne step, one hand still pressed to the cold marble, the other gripping the wet cloth so tightly her fingers ached. She knew she should move. She knew she should lower her face to the floor like every servant had been taught. But fear had locked her in place. The king stopped halfway down the center aisle. He was taller than Clara remembered, broad-shouldered beneath his black coat, his dark hair brushed back from a face cut with quiet authority. His eyes were not warm. They were a pale gray, almost silver beneath the torchlight, and when they landed on her, Clara felt as if every secret she had ever swallowed had suddenly become visible. Lady Marin stepped forward with a graceful bow. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice soft enough to sound wounded. "We apologize for the disorder. This Omega was careless near the throne path." Clara's throat tightened. The words were a lie, polished clean and offered like truth. Around them, the court stayed silent. No one corrected Marin. No one admitted they had watched Clara be forced toward the steps. Rowan's gaze did not leave Clara. "Careless," he repeated. The single word was calm, but the hall seemed to shrink around it. Marin lowered her lashes. "She was told to clean the hall, Your Majesty, but she allowed the stain to spread. I feared she might disrespect the throne if I did not intervene." A few nobles murmured in agreement, eager to stand on the safer side of power. Clara could feel their judgment pressing against her back. She wanted to explain, but her voice had never been a weapon. It was a small thing, trained by years of dismissal to stay quiet. She looked down at the marble, at the streaks of red water near her knees, and shame burned hotter than the torchlight. Rowan took another step forward. Then another. No one breathed. Clara heard the faint scrape of his cloak across the floor, the steady rhythm of his boots, and the distant crackle of flames above them. He came within a few feet of her and stopped at the base of the steps. Clara bowed her head at once. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she whispered. "I was only trying to finish before you returned." The silence that followed felt endless. Then Lady Marin gave a delicate laugh. "You see, she admits she knew she should not be here." Clara closed her eyes. The humiliation was sharp, but familiar. It was the same ache she had carried since childhood, the ache of being blamed for obeying, punished for surviving, mocked for standing exactly where others had pushed her. But then a smaller sound cut through the hall, a restrained breath of pain from the young guard near the right pillar. Clara looked toward him before she could stop herself. He was trying to hide his injured hand behind his back, his face pale with embarrassment. No one else noticed. Or perhaps they did and decided he was not important enough. Clara's body moved before fear could hold it down. She reached for the clean edge of her sleeve and tore a narrow strip of fabric free. The sound made several nobles gasp, as if her ruined dress mattered more than the guard's discomfort. Keeping her eyes low, Clara shifted just enough to offer him the cloth. "Please," she said quietly. "Wrap this around your hand." The guard stared at her, stunned. Lady Marin's expression hardened. "Clara, stop making a scene." But Clara did not look at her. She saw only the young man's trembling fingers, the way he hesitated as if kindness had become dangerous in this room. "Take it," she whispered. "It will help until the healer comes." For the first time since entering the hall, Clara forgot the throne, the nobles, and the king watching over her. She forgot herself. And that was when Rowan Blackthorn's eyes changed. Not softer exactly, but deeper, as if something ancient inside him had gone still. He looked from the torn strip of Clara's sleeve to the guard, then to the wet floor, then finally to Lady Marin. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that the whole court leaned in to hear it. "Who ordered her to cross the throne path?" Lady Marin's smile held for one careful second too long. Then it trembled at the edges. The court waited with the nervous stillness of wolves sensing a storm behind a closed door. Clara kept her eyes lowered, but she could feel the weight of King Rowan's question moving through the hall, touching every witness, every hidden lie, every breath that had joined the laughter. No one answered. The young guard clutched the strip of cloth Clara had given him, his face pale, his gaze darting toward Lady Marin as if the truth itself were something he had been trained to fear. Rowan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I asked a question," he said. "Who ordered her to cross the throne path?" Lady Marin dipped into another graceful bow, but this time the movement looked less elegant, more defensive. Your Majesty, it was a misunderstanding. The servant girl was overwhelmed. Omegas can become confused under pressure, especially in sacred places. Clara felt those words land like cold rain. Confused. Overwhelmed. Servant girl. Each one was chosen to shrink her until she became small enough for the room to ignore again. But Rowan looked at Clara as if she were the only honest thing standing beneath the chandeliers. Is that true? He asked. Clara's pulse stumbled. She had spent years surviving by giving answers that offended no one. Yes, my lord. No, my lady. I am sorry. It will not happen again. Those phrases had protected her more than courage ever had. Yet now the king was waiting, and for the first time, the silence expected from her felt heavier than the risk of speaking. She lifted her eyes only as far as his coat buttons, polished black against the torchlight. I was told to clean the hall before your Majesty returned, she said softly. The stain had reached the steps. I did not want to leave it there. Rowan's gaze shifted to the floor, then to the bucket, then to the water spread in a wide crimson wash across the marble. And who moved the bucket? Clara's lips parted, but fear caught the answer before it escaped. Around her, the nobles held themselves perfectly still, though she could sense their attention sharpening. This was no longer a joke to them. This was a test, and they were beginning to realize they had laughed too loudly on the wrong side of it. Lady Marin stepped in quickly. The bucket must have slipped. She is not used to royal chambers. The young guard made a small sound. Not a word. Barely a breath. But Rowan heard it. His head turned toward the pillar. You. Come forward. The guard stiffened, then obeyed, walking into the open with the awkward dignity of someone who had never expected to be noticed by a king. He was young, perhaps 19, with sandy blonde hair and a plain uniform too big at the shoulders. Clara recognized him from the side gate. Nathan Cole, a junior palace guard who usually opened the kitchen deliveries before dawn. He stopped several feet away and bowed deeply. Your Majesty. Rowan looked at the strip of gray fabric wrapped around Nathan's hand. Did you see what happened? Nathan swallowed. Lady Marin's face went still as painted glass. The court seemed to lean toward him without moving. I saw the bucket kicked, Your Majesty, Nathan said at last. Clara's heart gave a frightened leap. A whisper rippled across the hall. By whom? Rowan asked. Nathan's jaw tightened. He looked once at Clara, at the girl who had offered him kindness while the room treated her like blame-made flesh. Then he lowered his head. Lord Varick, Your Majesty. At Lady Marin's signal. The whisper became a wave. Lady Marin turned sharply toward Nathan. That is a disgraceful accusation. Rowan lifted one hand, and the hall fell silent again. Clara could barely breathe. The truth had been spoken, but truth did not always save people like her. Sometimes it only made powerful people angrier. Rowan descended one step toward Clara. She instinctively tried to move back, but her wet dress tangled beneath her knees. Before she could fall, his hand caught her elbow, steady and firm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. The touch was brief, respectful, and yet Clara felt the world narrow to that single point of warmth. Not possession. Not command. Protection. Rowan released her as soon as she was steady, then turned to the court. She was not confused, he said. She was cornered. His voice remained calm, but something in it made every noble lower their eyes. Lady Marin opened her mouth, then closed it when Rowan's stare found her. Clara stood frozen at the base of the throne steps, still holding the damp cloth, still marked by the hall's cruelty, but no longer alone inside it. For the first time, the room that had tried to bury her in shame had to look at her and see a person. Rowan's words did not strike the hall like thunder. They settled over it like frost, quiet and impossible to ignore. Clara stood beneath the towering throne steps, her sleeve torn, her dress damp, her heart beating so hard she feared everyone could hear it. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lady Maren recovered, her chin lifting with the fragile pride of someone who had never imagined being corrected in public. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "I only meant to preserve the dignity of your hall." The girl was careless, and servants must be taught boundaries. Clara felt the old instinct rise in her again, the instinct to apologize even when she had done nothing wrong. It pressed at her tongue, familiar and bitter. But before she could speak, Rowan turned fully toward Lady Maren. "Boundaries," he repeated. His gaze traveled over the gathered nobles, over the polished gowns, the gold pins, the faces trying to look innocent after enjoying her humiliation. Then perhaps the court needs a reminder of its own. The silence deepened. Rowan walked past Clara to the first throne step, where the stains still glimmered in the torchlight. He looked down at it, then at the bucket lying on its side, then at Lord Varick, who had suddenly become fascinated with the floor. "Lord Varick," Rowan said. The man stiffened. He was broad, richly dressed, and old enough to know better, but his confidence had faded into a pale, nervous mask. "Your Majesty, I assure you, I merely shifted my foot. A regrettable accident." Nathan Cole looked down, jaw tight, but Clara saw his shoulders tremble. He had told the truth, and now the room was deciding whether to punish him for it. Without thinking, she took a small step closer to him, as if her presence could shield him from the weight of noble anger. Rowan noticed. His eyes softened by a fraction before returning to Varick. An accident that followed Lady Maren's signal. Varick opened his mouth, then closed it. Lady Maren moved forward. "This is absurd. Are we truly placing the word of a kitchen omega and a junior guard above members of your court?" The words hung there, polished and poisonous. Clara felt the hall tilt back toward the old order. She knew that tone. She had heard it from mistresses who blamed maids for broken cups, from stewards who accused hungry children of stealing scraps, from high-born wolves who believed rank could turn cruelty into truth. Rowan's expression did not change, but the air around him seemed to sharpen. "No," he said. "I am placing what I saw above what you wish I had not seen." Lady Maren went still. Clara looked up before she could stop herself. Rowan had seen it. Not just the bucket, not just the lie, but the way Clara had been pushed and mocked and cornered. He had seen her kneel, seen her reach for Nathan, seen the small piece of mercy she had offered when everyone else chose judgment. The realization made her chest ache in a way that was almost painful. Rowan stepped down until he stood beside her again. Clara tried to bow, but his voice stopped her. "Do not." It was not harsh. It was a command wrapped in restraint, as though he knew how long she had been trained to make herself smaller. She froze, eyes wide. Around them, several nobles exchanged uneasy looks. An omega standing upright beside the throne steps was a sight none of them knew how to accept. Rowan removed the black cloak from his shoulders. The hall seemed to breathe in at once. Before Clara understood what he intended, he placed it gently around her. The fabric was warm, heavy, and clean, falling over her stained dress like midnight over a wounded field. Clara's fingers clutched the edge, stunned by the dignity of it. No one had covered her to protect her pride before. No one had ever looked at her shame and decided it did not belong to her. Rowan faced the court, his pale eyes cutting through every lowered head. "This hall is not defiled by the hands that clean it," he said. "It is defiled by those who use power to humiliate the powerless." Lady Maren's face drained of color. Lord Varick bowed so low his voice nearly vanished when he whispered an apology. But Rowan did not look satisfied. Clara sensed this was not finished. The truth had opened a door, and beyond it waited something larger than justice, something that made the torches flicker silver at their edges and made the mark beneath Clara's skin begin to warm. The warmth beneath Clara's skin began as a quiet pulse, so faint she thought it was only fear. It gathered at her wrist, hidden beneath the sleeve torn short for Nathan's bandage, and moved through her like moonlight finding a crack in a locked room. Clara tightened her fingers around the edge of Rowan's cloak, trying to steady herself. The fabric smelled of cedar, winter air, and something clean she could not name. It should have made her more afraid, standing covered by the Alpha King's own cloak before the entire court. Instead, it made the room feel less capable of swallowing her. Lady Marin noticed first. Her gaze dropped to Clara's exposed wrist, and her expression changed from anger to alarm. "Your Majesty," she said quickly, "perhaps the omega should be removed. She looks unwell." Clara looked down. A faint silver line had appeared beneath her skin, curving along the inside of her wrist like the first edge of a crescent moon. She pulled her hand back, but not before several nobles saw it. The whisper that spread through the hall was different this time. Not cruel. Afraid. Rowan turned toward her, and the whole world seemed to narrow. His eyes fixed on the mark, then lifted to her face. Clara expected suspicion. She expected him to step away, to remember that she was only a kitchen servant wrapped in a king's cloak by accident. But Rowan did not move away. He became very still. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had spoken her name. Not Omega. Not girl. Not servant. Clara. The sound of it in his voice made her throat tighten. "I am sorry," she whispered, though she did not know what she was apologizing for. The mark brightened. The torches along the walls flickered, their red glow thinning into silver at the edges. High above, the iron chandeliers trembled without wind. Nathan stepped back, eyes wide. Lord Varric muttered something about old magic. Lady Marin's composure cracked completely. "That cannot be real. She is nobody." The words should have hurt. They had hurt before, in different forms, from different mouths. But now they sounded strangely distant, as if they belonged to another life where Clara had believed them. Rowan's jaw tightened. "Be careful, Lady Marin. Your next words may define you more truthfully than you intend." Marin fell silent, but hatred flashed across her face. Clara saw it and instinctively tried to hide her wrist beneath the cloak. Rowan noticed the movement. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand, palm open, giving her the choice to refuse. "May I?" he asked. The court seemed shocked that a king would ask permission from her. Clara was shocked too. For a moment, she could only stare at his hand, strong and steady, not reaching to claim, not forcing her to obey. Just waiting. With a trembling breath, she placed her wrist above his palm. He did not close his fingers around it. He simply held his hand beneath hers, close enough for warmth, distant enough for respect. The silver mark flared once, soft and bright. Rowan's breath changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But Clara heard it, a slight break in the rhythm of a man who had learned never to show surprise. Across the hall, an elderly councilwoman gasped. "The moon oath mark," she whispered. "Impossible. No one has seen it in generations." Clara looked from the woman to Rowan, lost and frightened. "What does that mean?" she asked. Rowan's eyes remained on the glowing crescent, but his voice softened when he answered. "It means the old bloodline recognizes what the court refused to see." Lady Marin shook her head. "This is some servant trick." Rowan looked at her then, and even the torches seemed to hold still. "There are no tricks strong enough to command the oath stones beneath this hall." At his words, the white throne steps gave off a faint silver shimmer, as if waking from a long sleep. Clara felt the floor steady beneath her feet. For years, she had moved through life as though she were borrowing space from people who wished she would disappear. Now the oldest stones in the palace were answering her presence. Rowan turned to the court, still standing beside her, his cloak around her shoulders and the mark glowing between them. "Hear me clearly," he said. "Until this sign is understood, Clara Whitmore is under my protection. No one will touch her name, her place, or her dignity again." The declaration did not need to be loud to shake the room. It moved through the blood hall with the weight of law, settling into the marble, the banners, the lowered heads of nobles who suddenly remembered how dangerous silence could become when truth stood inside it. Clara could not speak. The silver mark at her wrist had dimmed to a gentle glow, but its warmth remained, steady as a heartbeat beneath her skin. Rowan's cloak covered her shoulders, yet she still felt exposed, not in shame, but in the strange terror of being seen too clearly. Under my protection. No one had ever placed those words around her before. They felt too large for the girl who scrubbed kitchen floors before sunrise, who counted flour sacks in the pantry, who slept in a narrow servant's room where winter air slipped through the window frame. Lady Maren looked as if she had swallowed a curse she was not allowed to say aloud. Lord Varick kept his head bowed, his hands folded so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The elderly councilwoman stepped forward with careful reverence, her silver hair pinned beneath a black veil. "Your Majesty," she said, "this sign must be examined by the full council. The old laws are clear. If the moon oath has awakened, then the palace must know whether it points to a guardian bond, a royal debt, or something more ancient." At the final words, another ripple passed through the court. Clara heard it in their breathing. Something more ancient. The phrase reached places inside her she had never known were waiting. Rowan's expression remained controlled, but Clara felt the change in him beside her. A quiet tension, like a wolf standing still before the forest breaks open. "Then the council will gather," he said. "But not tonight in front of those who mistook cruelty for entertainment." The councilwoman bowed. "As you command." Lady Maren lifted her chin again, though the confidence had faded from her voice. "Your Majesty, surely it is unwise to place so much importance on a servant's mark before we know what it means. The court will talk." Rowan turned to her. "The court has talked enough." Maren's lips pressed together. Clara should have felt satisfaction, but she only felt tired, the kind of tired that came after holding herself together for too many years. The bucket still lay on its side. The water still streaked the floor. The stain near the throne step had thinned into pale red trails, no longer threatening, no longer the center of the room. Yet Clara could not stop looking at it. A few minutes ago, that stain had been the excuse to humiliate her. Now everyone stood around it as if it had revealed them instead. Nathan Cole shifted nearby, uncertain whether he had permission to leave or breathe. Clara noticed the cloth on his hand had loosened. Instinctively, she moved toward him and adjusted the knot more securely. Nathan stared at her in disbelief. "Thank you," he whispered. Clara gave a small nod. It was easier to care for someone else than to understand what had just happened to herself. When she turned back, Rowan was watching her again, and this time there was no coldness in his eyes. There was something quieter, almost wounded, as if her gentleness had touched a place he had kept locked away. "You do that without thinking," he said. Clara looked down. "Do what, Your Majesty?" "Help people who offered you nothing." The words made her chest tighten. She wanted to say that helping was the only power she had ever been allowed to keep. She wanted to say that when people treated you like you were worth nothing, you learned to recognize the same loneliness in others. But the hall was listening, so she only answered, "Someone should." Rowan held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked to the guards at the doors. "Clear the hall." Lady Maren startled. "Your Majesty." Rowan did not look at her. "All guests will return to their quarters. Lord Varick will surrender his court privileges pending council review. Lady Maren will remain available for questioning. No one will approach Miss Whitmore without my consent." "Miss Whitmore." "Not servant. Not Omega." Her name moved through the hall like a door opening. As the nobles began to file out, their whispers followed them, softer now, threaded with fear and wonder. Clara stood at the foot of the throne steps, wrapped in black royal wool, watching the room empty around her. For the first time, she was not being dismissed. Everyone else was. The doors closed. One by one, and with each heavy sound, the blood hall became less like a courtroom and more like a place that had finally exhaled. Clara stood where she had been left, near the first throne step, the king's cloak still warm around her shoulders, the silver mark on her wrist glowing faintly beneath the torn edge of her sleeve. The great chamber felt enormous now that the nobles were gone. Their laughter had emptied out, but Clara could still hear the echo of it in places no silence could reach. Nathan Cole had been escorted to the side by a healer, though not before he bowed to Clara with a gratitude that made her look away. Gratitude was difficult to receive when she had spent most of her life being thanked only for disappearing quickly. Rowan remained near the throne steps, watching the last guards secure the doors. When he turned back to her, he did not look like the distant king she had seen from the edges of ceremonies. He looked tired. Not weak, never that, but tired in a way that power could not hide. Clara lowered her eyes out of habit. "You may look at me," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried no command to shrink. Clara lifted her gaze slowly. "I do not know what is happening, Your Majesty." Her voice sounded small in the vast hall. Rowan glanced at the mark on her wrist. "Neither do I fully." That honesty startled her more than any royal decree could have. Kings were supposed to know everything. Alpha kings even more so. They were stories wrapped in authority, men who could silence a room with a glance and bend packs with a treaty. But Rowan Blackthorn stood before her and admitted there was something beyond his certainty. Clara held the cloak closed at her chest. "Am I in trouble?" His expression shifted, not into a smile, but into something gentler than the hall had earned. "No." "Are you afraid you should be?" She almost lied. It would have been easier. A servant who said no made everyone comfortable. But the mark on her wrist pulsed once, warm and bright, and the truth rose before she could bury it. "I am always afraid I should be." Rowan went still. The answer had left her too bare. Clara quickly looked down. "I did not mean to speak out of place." "You did not." He moved toward the side of the hall, not closer to trap her, but toward the overturned bucket. He picked it up himself. The sight was so strange that Clara forgot to breathe. No king cleaned his own hall. No alpha bent for a servant's bucket. Yet Rowan set it upright, then looked at the watered stain on the marble. "When I was young," he said, "my father told me this hall only respected strength." Clara listened, uncertain whether she was allowed to respond. "I believed him for many years." His voice lowered. "Tonight, I watched an entire room mistake cruelty for strength, and I watched you answer it with mercy." Clara's fingers tightened on the cloak. "I was not trying to answer anything." "I know. That is why it mattered." The silver torches flickered again, softer this time, as if the palace itself were listening. Clara felt the warmth at her wrist spread upward, not painful, only unfamiliar. She touched the mark with her other hand. "Does it mean I belong to the throne?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and her cheeks burned. Rowan's gaze sharpened, but not with anger. "No, Clara. No one belongs to a throne." The answer settled over her like a door unlocking. "Then what does it mean?" Before Rowan could reply, a low sound rolled through the floor beneath them, not loud, not dangerous, more like ancient stone remembering a forgotten song. The white steps shimmered again. At the center of the throne, a thin line of silver light appeared along the carved crest of the blackthorn wolves. Rowan turned toward it, his face unreadable. Clara took one step back, but the mark on her wrist brightened, drawing the light from the throne toward her like moonlight crossing water. From somewhere beyond the sealed doors, bells began to ring across the palace, slow and solemn. Rowan's eyes met hers. "Those bells have not sounded in 100 years, he said. Clara's breath caught. "Why are they ringing now?" The answer came not from Rowan, but from the old councilwoman's voice beyond the door, trembling as she called for entry. "Because the moon oath has named a living heir to the lost Luna line." The councilwoman entered only after Rowan gave permission, and even then she crossed the threshold as if the floor itself had become sacred. Her name was Celine Hart, the oldest keeper of Blackthorn law, and the tremor in her hands made the silver keys at her belt whisper against one another. Behind her, 2 senior guards remained outside the door, faces pale beneath the glow of the corridor lamps. No one else was allowed in. The bells continued to ring across the palace, each note slow and deep, rolling through the walls like memory returning after a century of silence. Clara stood near the throne steps, wrapped in the king's cloak, wishing she could step backward into the ordinary life she understood. Kitchen smoke. Laundry steam. Morning bread cooling on wooden racks. Anything but ancient bells and glowing stones, and a mark on her wrist that had made powerful people afraid. Celine bowed to Rowan first, then turned to Clara and bowed lower. Clara stared at her, startled. "Please do not," she whispered. "I am only Clara Whitmore." Celine lifted her head, and her eyes shone with something too solemn to be pity. "That may be the name you were given, child, but the moon oath does not wake for ordinary blood." Rowan's gaze sharpened. "Explain." Celine stepped toward the throne, careful not to come too close to Clara without invitation. 100 years ago, before the Blackthorn throne was secured, there was another line beside it. The Luna line. Not rulers by force, but guardians by bond. Their gift was not command. It was balance. Mercy. The ability to steady the wild heart of the kingdom when power turned cold. Clara felt the words move through her like a story she should have known but had somehow lost. Celine continued, "The last known Luna heir vanished during the ash winter. Records said the bloodline ended. But some of us believed a child was hidden among common families for protection." Clara shook her head slowly. "My mother worked in the palace laundry. My father repaired wagon wheels outside the east wall. They were kind, but they were not royal." "Kindness is sometimes where royal blood hides best," Celine said softly. Lady Marin's words returned to Clara, sharp and ugly. "She is nobody." Clara looked at the silver mark and wondered how many people had spent years teaching her to believe a lie because it made their world easier. Rowan's voice cut through her thoughts, steady and low. "Does the mark bind her to me?" The question filled the hall with a different kind of silence. Clara's breath caught, but Rowan did not look away from Celine. He asked like a king demanding law, not like a man reaching for possession. Celine looked between them. "The moon oath cannot force a bond. It reveals a truth. If Clara is of the lost Luna line, the mark appeared because the throne itself recognized her dignity when the court denied it. It may also mean her fate and yours now stand at the same crossroads." Clara held the cloak tighter. "I do not want anyone to be forced because of me." Rowan turned to her at once. "No one will be." The certainty in his voice steadied her more than the glowing stones beneath her feet. Celine's expression softened. That is why the oath chose this moment. Not when she was praised. Not when she was polished and presented. It woke when she was humiliated, and still chose mercy. The hall seemed to listen. Clara remembered Nathan's injured hand, the way he had looked so alone among people who outranked him. She had not thought of courage. She had only thought that someone should care. Rowan stepped closer, leaving enough space for her to breathe. "Clara," he said, "before the council gathers, you should know this. Whatever bloodline sleeps in you, whatever mark the old stones reveal, it does not erase who you are. You are not valuable because the throne finally noticed you. The throne is fortunate it did." Tears warmed Clara's eyes before she could stop them. For years, every compliment she received had been attached to usefulness. Good girl, because she worked quietly. Good servant, because she did not complain. Good Omega, because she stayed small. But Rowan's words did not ask her to shrink. They did not ask her to perform gratitude for being spared. They simply made room for her to stand. Before she could answer, the silver light along the throne crest gathered into a brighter glow. The crescent on Clara's wrist answered, and the doors of the hall swung open by themselves, revealing the nobles gathered beyond, drawn by the bells they did not understand. Lady Marin stood at the front, her face pale with disbelief. Celine turned toward them and raised her voice. "Witness the old law. Clara Whitmore is under royal protection, named by the moon oath, and recognized by the throne. The nobles stared, speechless. Clara felt Rowan beside her, calm as winter, unmovable as stone. And for the first time in her life, when the court looked at her, she did not lower her head. The silence beyond the open doors was not empty. It was crowded with fear, disbelief, and the fragile sound of old power rearranging itself. Nobles who had laughed at Clara less than an hour ago now stood shoulder to shoulder in the corridor, unable to step forward and unwilling to leave. Their eyes moved from the silver mark on her wrist to Rowan's cloak around her shoulders, then to the throne steps glowing faintly behind her. Clara felt every glance, but she did not fold beneath them. Her hands still trembled. Her heart still beat too fast. Yet something inside her had changed shape. The room that once made her feel small now seemed to be waiting for her to decide how much space she would take. Lady Marin broke first. "This is madness," she said, though her voice had lost its polished sweetness. "A servant cannot be recognized by the throne because of a glow and a frightened councilwoman's superstition." Celine Hart's face hardened. "I have served Blackthorn law for 52 years. I do not mistake oath light for superstition." Lady Marin looked to the other nobles, searching for agreement, but the same people who had eagerly joined her cruelty now studied the floor. Rowan stepped forward, and the corridor seemed to pull back from him. "Lady Marin," he said, "you arranged the humiliation of a palace servant inside a sacred hall, instructed Lord Varick to create false evidence, and attempted to twist her obedience into guilt. Do you deny it before the moon oath?" Marin's mouth opened. The mark on Clara's wrist brightened once, casting silver across the marble. Marin saw it and stopped. That hesitation was answer enough. Rowan turned to the guards. "Lady Marin will be removed from all royal proceedings until the council completes its review. Lord Varick will do the same." There was no shouting, no spectacle, only the clean finality of consequence. The guards approached with formal restraint, and for the first time, Marin looked not powerful, not untouchable, but terribly ordinary. As she passed Clara, her eyes flashed with humiliation. "This does not make you one of us," she whispered. Clara felt the old wound reach for her, the instinct to absorb the insult and carry it quietly. But Rowan's cloak warmed her shoulders, the oath mark glowed at her wrist, and the throne behind her held its silver light. Clara looked at Marin and answered softly, "I never wanted to be cruel enough to belong to you." The words were not loud, but they traveled. Nathan Cole lowered his gaze to hide a small smile. Celine's eyes filled with quiet pride. Even Rowan turned toward Clara with something like wonder, as if her gentleness had revealed a sharper courage than anger ever could. Marin was led away, and the court parted to let her pass. No one reached for her. No one defended her. Clara watched, not with triumph, but with a strange sadness. She understood too well what it meant to fear losing status, shelter, a place in the world. But she also understood, more clearly now, that fear did not excuse the harm people chose to cause. When the corridor emptied again, Celine stepped beside Clara. "The council must gather before dawn. There will be questions about your family, your childhood, any keepsakes your mother left behind." Clara thought of the small wooden box beneath her narrow bed, the only thing she had saved from her parents, a faded ribbon, a cracked silver button, and a folded note her mother had told her not to open until she was ready. She had always assumed ready meant grown. Now she wondered if it meant tonight. Rowan noticed the change in her face. "There is something," he said. Clara nodded slowly. "My mother left me a note. I never read it." The bells outside softened, their deep ringing fading into the distant hush of the palace. Celine drew a careful breath. "Then we should retrieve it before the council begins." Clara looked toward the open doors, toward the servant corridors she had walked for years unseen. She could return to that small room as the same girl who had left it carrying a bucket, yet nothing about the path back would be the same. Rowan moved to her side, not ahead of her, not behind her. Beside her. "Clara," he said quietly, "you do not have to face them alone." She looked at the king, at the man whose power had filled the blood hall, and whose restraint had given her room to breathe. Then she looked at her wrist, where the crescent mark glowed like a promise she did not yet understand. For the first time, the unknown did not feel only like danger. It felt like a door. And Clara Whitmore stepped toward it with her head raised. The servant corridors felt different with Rowan beside her. Clara had walked them thousands of times with baskets against her hip, with soap on her hands, with her eyes lowered whenever footsteps approached. Tonight the same narrow passage seemed to hold its breath. Kitchen maids peeked from doorways. Footmen stopped mid-step. A boy carrying folded linens nearly dropped the entire stack when he saw the Alpha King moving through the servants' wing, not as a distant ruler passing above them, but as a man walking quietly beside the girl they had all known as Clara from the kitchens. No one spoke. Clara wished she could tell them she was still the same person, but she was no longer sure what that meant. Her small room waited at the end of the east hallway, barely wider than a closet, with one narrow bed, one wooden chair, and a window that looked toward the stable roof. She paused at the door, suddenly embarrassed by its plainness. Rowan seemed to understand, because he stopped outside instead of following. "I will wait here," he said. The choice was so simple, so respectful, that Clara had to blink against the sting in her eyes. She entered alone and knelt beside the bed, reaching beneath it for the wooden box her mother had left behind. The lid creaked softly when she opened it. Inside lay the faded ribbon, the cracked silver button, and the folded note she had avoided for years. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. The writing was delicate, faded at the edges, but still clear. "My dearest Clara, if the world has made you feel small, forgive me. I hid you among ordinary walls because your blood was never ordinary, and powerful people fear gentle things they cannot control. You are descended from the last Luna guardians, the line sworn not to rule above others, but to stand beside power and remind it to remain human. If the mark ever wakes, do not let them convince you it makes you less yourself. It only proves that what was kind in you was never weakness." Clara pressed the note to her chest, and the tears came silently. Not because she had discovered a title. Not because the palace stones had recognized her. Because her mother had known. Her mother had seen the gentleness others mocked and had called it strength long before Clara was brave enough to believe it. When she stepped back into the hallway, Rowan saw the note in her hand and did not ask to take it. He only waited until she offered it. His eyes moved across the words, and something in his face softened with a grief that felt older than both of them. "She protected you well," he said. Clara wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "She left me alone." "She left you alive," Rowan answered gently. "And she left you the truth when the world was ready to hear it." By the time they returned to the Blood Hall, the council had gathered, not with the careless arrogance of the earlier court, but with solemn faces and lowered voices. Celine read the note aloud. The throne steps answered in silver light. The crescent on Clara's wrist glowed steady and calm, no longer like a warning, but like a lantern. No one laughed now. No one called her nobody. When Celine finished, she bowed before Clara again, and this time Clara did not ask her to stop. She understood now that the bow was not worship. It was acknowledgement. Rowan stood at the foot of the throne, then turned to face the council and the servants gathered at the doors. "Clara Whitmore will not be hidden," he said. "She will not be used, claimed, or silenced by fear. The Luna line has returned, and whether she chooses court, council, or another path entirely, that choice will be hers." Clara looked at him, startled by the freedom inside the words. The old stories had made destiny sound like a chain. Rowan made it sound like an open hand. Celine stepped forward. "And what of your bond, your majesty?" The hall stilled. Rowan looked at Clara, not at the council. "If there is a bond," he said, "it will be honored only as she wishes it to be." Clara felt the mark warm, and for the first time, she did not fear it. She stepped beside him, not behind him, not below him. Beside him. The throne light brightened, washing the hall in silver. Clara thought of the bucket, the cold floor, the laughter that had tried to bury her. Then she thought of her mother's words, Nathan's grateful eyes, and Rowan standing still while giving her room to stand taller. I do not know what I will become, she said, her voice quiet but clear. But I know I will not kneel for cruelty again. Outside, dawn touched the palace windows, turning the black marble pale with morning. And in the hall that had once demanded her shame, Clara Whitmore raised her head as the first light of a new kingdom found her.